Hello, gentlemen. How are you doing today?
Doing well.
Good, thank you.
We're back here for another webinar. I think this is going to be an interesting topic because you guys have been at this IT thing with a lot of different types of businesses out there for a long time. So you've seen a lot of mistakes that are made, and I'm really looking forward to talking through kind of the different levels of mistakes and kind of how businesses can approach those things to see, hey, are we making these? What do we do about them? So really looking forward to today's conversation. Thanks for joining me again.
Happy to be
Happy to
here.
do it.
So today's conversation, we are going to walk through the 10 most common IT mistakes, as the webinar title suggests. But then we're going to really look at how you can think about your business goals and align IT strategy with them and that approach. And you guys have perfected that over the years. So I'm looking forward to hearing that. And then we'll talk about competitive advantage. Maybe a phrase that isn't used quite often in today's business world or thought about, because there's all kinds of competition everywhere. But I love the way you guys break that down. So we'll get into some of that. And I think this is a really valuable conversation for C-level executives to listen into, even if it's just a reminder. This is great stuff. So let's dive in. Succurri, as always, provides a ton of different types of services. And on our YouTube channel here and our on-demand webinars page, we want to provide resources for a bunch of different subjects. And this one is definitely about IT leadership in that category. As always, check us out on YouTube, hit the subscribe. This isn't the only valuable piece of content we put out. A lot of folks listening to us out there, also on LinkedIn, but this QR code will take you right to the YouTube channel. So let's
Hours and hours of great knowledge nuggets.
And all
knowledge nugget.
accessible. Yeah, I mean, like,
Yeah, all accessible. Well, the thing that I like about you guys is you're techies, but you don't sound like techies. You sound like people who care about running a good business. And that's the approach you take. And I always feel like that's a refreshing perspective. It's not just about the tech. Okay, so what we decided to do was break up these 10 mistakes, that IT mistakes that businesses make in kind of a right away, resolve today, like get this fixed if you're making these mistakes. And we'll go into some other ones that are, kind of near term and then a little bit longer term to look at. So as we think about these, why did we put these, and first of all, what are these and why did we put these in? Hey, you got to resolve this today, or you can resolve this today.
Yeah, so these are business ending potential events, and they are very solvable today. So like shared accounts, and a lot of these things come from, potential clients that we speak with or business owners that, have been doing something the same way for a long time and like, it should be fine, right? I've never had an issue with it. And so like shared accounts, for example, like you've got the same person or you've got the same username and password across all of your computers, right? So that's the cascading failure. You knock out one pillar and the whole building comes down with it. And so shared accounts, shared passwords, things like that. One, they've been on the do not do list for the last 25 years, but it is really, really a problem nowadays. MFA is not new to the naughty list, but it is, I'd say in the last couple of years, it has become no longer, an advanced technique. It is a mandatory safeguard that you have to have in place to secure your company. So anybody that doesn't know what MFA is, it's multi-factor authentication, and that means that you have more than just a password, right? So you're most likely, most banks or the kind of the original starters of it, you had some way of verifying after you put a password in, there was some other form of communication, or I'm sorry, of authentication that you had to do. I remember, back in early days, like Bank of America had like a picture of something. That was your other form of like, are you actually signing into the right account?
That's the one we're like, is that a bridge? I don't know. It looks like a bridge.
Yeah, or like a kite. Oh, I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
And so obviously that's adapted significantly over time. And so most people now are familiar with like the Google Authenticator or the Microsoft Authenticator, or if you're in some larger companies, you're going to have some form of token that's generating random numbers for you, whether it's a little RFID card or RSA card, or something along those lines, but something other than a password. In coming from the security perspective, the password is dead. Passwords are hackable. Believe it or not, most employees are willing to give them over to bad actors willingly, through phishing attempts or social engineering. And so that MFA is that kind of that backstop to stop that. However, MFA is not foolproof, right? You can't just say, oh, I put in MFA and that problem isn't there. There's other steps that have to go there. But the goal in this case is not being the low-hanging fruit. And so if you put some levels of guardrails up around employees turning over the keys of the kingdom to a bad actor, the likelihood is that bad actor will probably move on unless the value behind the gates is really, really valuable. SSO it's a single sign-on, and that's kind of adding to the layers of MFA and passwords. So you have SSO is really more of a combination of many authentication mechanisms that allow it to be easy for your staff to sign in and out of systems with not having to remember.
Sorry to interrupt there. That's where I go to log in to, I'm just going to pick a random app, Teamwork is a project management software. No one needs to know about Teamwork. We're not promoting it. It's a piece of software. When I go to log into it, it says, "Oh, do you want to log in with your Microsoft or with your Gmail or with your Apple?" Like I can pick what account I log in, and it remembers that login information for that particular app.
Correct, and that's a form of it. And you'll also see a lot of them now that say like SSO as well. So you'll have those three, and then you'll have SSO as well. Facebook has been used as a form of authentication. So there's a lot of different authentication platforms out there. I'm not here to pitch one specific one today. There's a lot out there that depends on the type of company you are and what you're trying to achieve. But getting to making it easy for the end user, i.e. the staff, to being able, so they don't have to remember hundreds of passwords, because ultimately if they have to remember hundreds of passwords, most likely they're going to make the password very similar. And guys like myself are going to know the patterns to that, and then it makes it pretty easy to breach. So those ones are all solvable today. Most likely those are free. They're already included with licensing you're paying for.
How do you know if people in your business are or are not doing these?
Yeah, good question.
Like, I mean, isn't it a personal choice kind of thing these days?
Well, yeah. So in most cases, we see that companies have left it up to personal choice. And I will tell you, if it's left up to personal choice, it's not being done, because that's not really at the top of the mind of the employee. Like they're just there to do their job, right?
Yeah.
And so any sort of barriers that you put in place to stopping them from doing that is seen as, it could be Big Brother, it could be just a giant pain for them. There's a lot of pushback when it comes to security and adding additional layers to making the authentication happen. And so that's why I really like SSO, because it makes it even easier than it was before, where somebody was just putting in a password and they log into a system. Now, when in an SSO, you can just click a button and you sign in because you've already authenticated once, earlier in the day, and it allows you to navigate different systems.
Got it. So let's talk about the number 2 in the resolve today.
Yeah, cloud default. So I'm gonna discuss 365 today specifically. I mean, obviously the problem is across the board in different varying factors, but like Microsoft 365, Microsoft has always taken the tactic of allowing everything to happen and enforcing the IT administrator to lock it down. I'm going to tell you right now that doesn't happen very often. Even though they're an IT administrator, the cloud systems today are so complex that we even use tools to verify, to make sure that we're locking the systems down properly across all of the tenants that we manage. But knowing all the little tricks, all the little settings that you have to turn on, it's unmanageable for the average person, right? So if you're like, I'm a business owner, I'm gonna go set up my own 365 tenant, and my emails are coming in, I'm done, right? If that is all you've done, basically you've left every single door open possible to a significant breach.
Right, right. Okay, last one up. Why is it red? I mean, self-explanatory. Yeah, we do backups,
Well,
but what's the mistake here?
yeah. So this is the last line of support, right? So after you haven't changed your shared accounts, you don't have MFA on there, you've left all your defaults for the cloud, and now something bad has happened. Backups are the only way that you're going to be able to restore your company. And so if you have backups, the key is, have you actually restored them? Have you tested a restoration? Have you gone through the process to see what it looks like when you do a restore? The reason why we put this one in red is that I have conversations on a daily basis with business owners, and this is one of the things I ask. And they're like, oh, yeah, I back up. My IT guy backs it up. And I said, well, how do you know? And they're like, oh, well, either he tells me that he's backing it up. And I'm like, well, that's a fairly risky proposition for a business owner just to go off. Oh, yeah, he told me it works. And some people are like, oh, I get an email that says it completed. And I will tell you from professional opinion that an email that tells you completed means absolutely nothing, because the actual restoration tends to be a lot more complicated than that. One, it could be that the data was not actually there as expected. Like, you're seeing some systems are not designed to back up all the data. And so when you do a restoration, you realize that you're like, wait a second, I'm missing things that I anticipated to be there. In some cases, the restoration timeline takes way longer than so like, let's say, for example, it's called a recovery time objective, which means I'm going to need to restore by within 24 hours to keep my business functioning. Right. Well, all of a sudden you realize that your restoration process was actually 2 weeks. And so that 2 weeks may have been a company ending event. So it's really, really important to not only have your backups, but restore them to see how long it actually takes to get you back up and going. And if that restoration timeline is not in the RTO or the recovery time objective, you need to replace your backup system and get something that actually fits your needs.
So Andrew, as you listen to Grant talk, and you as a virtual CIO for different clients and companies, are these mistakes made by, do you see them being made by a certain size of business, a certain type of business? How would you characterize this level of mistakes, and kind of put it into perspective why we put them on the Resolve Today list?
Yeah, so I would tell you that unless a company has a dedicated backup specialist, that part of their job is to do a recovery test, like to actually see if the recovery happens, no one is doing this. And that could be, so usually that company needs to be like 500 plus employees to have a dedicated backup specialist. So basically every company that's below 500 employees is probably not testing this on a regular basis, or they don't have a dedicated process for it. Like, we're large enough as an MSP that we have dedicated backup specialists. And so like, we do this as part of our process, and we can validate that things work, but it's just missed so frequently. And I would tell, like Grant mentioned, the customer or the leads that we talk to say, my IT guy is telling me, or I get an email, I will buy you lunch if you said your restoration was that good and we could test it. Like, let's unplug your server from the wall, or let's unplug your internet, or whatever the critical access point is. And if they can restore you, I will happily buy you lunch. I'm pretty sure that if they don't restore you, you buy me lunch, I'm going to eat out for the rest of my life. So,
it doesn't have anything to do necessarily with size of business or type of business. It's really just one of those things that's missed. That's the mistake, I guess,
It like I said, unless you have dedicated specialists on your IT team, you just don't, you're still reactive. You don't have the time and the energy to dedicate to these tasks that are like non-emergencies, right?
Yeah.
And so I see this at very large companies that they don't have a backup specialist, and they're like, oh, we're good. You're like, have you tested that? Like, have you pulled the cord? And they're like, well, no, we don't do that. Oh, well, you don't know until that point. You hope you've been given a false sense of security via an email.
Tony, I've talked about this a couple different times about having like a disaster recovery preparedness, right? And so it's much like compliance. If you haven't gone through a formalized exercise, you haven't done it, and you won't survive a disaster. And so a formalized exercise could be a tabletop where you're going through, like the IT goes through and restores data, but backups are only part of the picture, right? So today we're talking about backups, but it's really about a disaster recovery. And you have to have a formalized process. You have to test that process, and you have to do it regularly because things change. So it's no formalized process. It's not going to happen.
So the backup part is interesting because it's kind of like saying, when you think about your insurance, oh, I'm covered. And then something happens and you go, oh, crap, we're not covered.
Not for
Because
that.
you haven't like tested, you haven't gone through and looked at that. Well, let me ask you this: as you guys were both talking about this, I was kind of thinking, if you went through the physical process of, yeah, you're doing backups, have you tested the restoration process? If you go through that process, do you kind of knock off number one and number two on this list, or are they all separate things?
They're definitely separate things. Like I say, the reason why the backups are so important is that the first two are going to be related to issues with bad actors, right? But backups themselves, anything can happen. Like that's your theft, fire, employee issues where they delete something accidentally, and like all those, like you get all the issues under the backup umbrella, where like shared accounts, MFA, cloud defaults are targeting on highly potential issues. But if you don't have a backup to restore from all the issues, you're done.
Yeah. Okay.
And we always talk about like the one thing. So this came really early in this conversation, but I would say that is the backup and testing is probably the one. Like if you take one thing from this call, it's really important. And what people will say is either, well, I'm good, and if you're okay with that, then that's fine. But if you're not okay with that, it's really not that expensive to test a full-blown restoration. And what I would suggest is reach out to your IT provider and say, I'd like to engage you in a paid restoration test, right? Like all of a sudden they'll get real interested because you're paying them for the time it takes. It's going to probably take 8 hours. And let's just say you're $1,500 into that. Like, except for the most micro-sized businesses, the cost of you being down for one day is significantly more than $1,500. So this is an incredibly valuable use of your resources to go do that test. Because if your cost of being down is 10,000 or 20,000 or 70,000, you want to know if your backups are not on point long before you have the event. So that's what I would have. What I would tell people is tell your provider, I want to pay for a backup restoration test, like in a mock emergency scenario, and see what happens. It'll be the best money you spend all year on your IT budget.
Well, and not to mention, like now, the time that this is coming out is during IT budgeting. Putting $1,500 on an IT budget isn't going to raise any red flags, right? So I highly recommend it. Now's the time to test it. And then at least that way, if you have to make some changes.
Right. All right. Well, let's move on to some more what I would call near-term problems or mistakes. Not problems, mistakes. I guess they're problems. But so as you're looking at your IT budget, as you're talking about this, these are things that are like, you have to work towards these a little bit. So talk to me about this first one, because before I knew you guys, I didn't know what shadow IT meant or SaaS sprawl. I just looked at it like, oh, everybody's buying products here and there, and nobody's keeping track of it. But maybe go through that first one and go through all of these, obviously. But why 3 to 6 months? Why do we put these on this part of the list? So these are 4, 5, and 6 IT mistakes that businesses make.
Perfect. So shadow IT is commonly used where you have potential tools or potential shortcuts that are being done by IT administrators. And it doesn't have to be IT administrator. It could be somebody that's like a power user that has been given maybe a little bit more carte blanche in the organization than maybe they should have been. And so they're starting to put in software that might be risky and nobody really knows about it. They might be putting in remote connectivity tools because they want to be able to easily connect to their workstation and use the tools that they want to versus the ones that have been supplied by the company. It might be that, all of a sudden a person decided that they want to start writing code in their lunchtime. And so they install a software like Python on their computer, and like all these things now are like just building up your risk factors of potentially really bad things from happening. It could be an insider risk that causes a massive breach. Not necessarily insider risk meaning that the employee is intentionally doing something bad. It means that they are more or less just given more permissions than they should be able to. We've always called it monkey with a gun, right? So like somebody's running around with more power in their hand than they really should. And so now you've got this giant risk that goes unchecked, unmonitored, and it's a real blind spot for ownership. In most cases, IT as well. So IT is really there to be able to provide guardrails based on the direction of the business owners, and saying, and those guardrails are to keep employees and staff in. And basically, hey, these are the rails that you have to operate in. And then when you start removing those rails, that's where shadow IT happens. And then you lose control of what's going on.
And it's, monkey with a gun. The thing that's interesting to me is it's always unintentional. It's not like we're saying people are malicious, although I guess there could be people out there.
That does happen.
But
Not less than the unintentional, but the unintentional and the intentional have the same consequences.
yeah.
Right. And I think that's the key to point out is like most people don't have malicious intent, right? Especially on the insider side of things, but you are more likely to have an insider event than you are to have an external penetration, just because somebody made a mistake and they put something in place that they hadn't thought, like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. And then it doesn't follow the guidelines of your security framework. And then you have some issues.
Is vendor, the kind of third party risk, the same kind of thing? Because maybe a vendor is a software vendor or it's a product vendor of some kind, or why are these two different things?
Well, yeah. So I'll cover SaaS sprawl, but to answer your question, is vendor and risk management, they also suffer from shadow IT, right? So that's part of the supply chain issue, that if that's not well managed down the line and they have shadow IT, then all of a sudden bad actors come through the vendor side and get access to your systems that way.
So shadow IT is just unmonitored technology that exposes the business.
Correct. Unmonitored and uncontrolled, unsanctioned.
Got it. So SaaS sprawl is different than that. How so?
Yeah, SaaS sprawl is where you have in the world of cloud, right? The nebulous term cloud, you have all these software as a service, and you have platforms as a service, and so you have all these different technologies that allow for people that haven't come from the IT background to easily access tools that help them with their job, right? And so it might be like Salesforce, and then you've got 365, and then you have AWS. But in these platforms, they have many, many different types of tools that you can subscribe to and to be able to help with your job. And if there's no oversight to how those tools are being issued or being how they're being monitored, basically you start having all these things getting added, right? So you might have like a marketing team that says, I need all these tools to do X, Y, and Z. And so the marketing company or the marketing group has been allowed to provision software on their own. And so they're able to spin up all these little tools and nobody really knows what's going on. And so let's say that marketing, the employees churn out. And so now you're paying for all this software that you have, like, that nobody has any clues even there. And accounting is going to continue to pay for it because it's been on the P&L forever. And they're like, oh, this is not a new charge, I'm not going to question it. Right. And so now you just have all this spend going on and nobody even knows that it exists.
Well, and any business owner that's lived through, let's call it $1 million to $2 million in top line revenue has experienced this. So it's not just a matter of, at least what I hear you saying is, it's not just a matter of, well, we need to make sure we monitor this technology so it doesn't expose us to risk, but also you might be spending too much money on things you don't need.
Yeah, we often go through all of our tool sets and just be like, is this being used, right? And so you follow the money. You go back to your P&L and look at your tool costs and start, going backwards and go, no, what's this for? Is it still here? And you'd be surprised how many thousands of dollars of monthly costs that you can save just by doing that on a regular basis.
Right. Well, and all this wraps up in a bow when you talk about zero trust, the security on the network, right?
Yeah. So zero trust. So the reason why this one's in red is, and this is, coming from what we've seen, how the industry is shaping, and the companies that are really, and more like the security companies that are on the cutting edge and see what AI has done to the security landscape have started to shift over. Like I'm seeing antivirus providers that used to be the standard antivirus and the AI and EDR, MDR type tools, and I'm starting to see them pivot over into zero trust models, just because they realize that with AI is faster than anything that we've seen. And so if you don't go from the perspective of trust absolutely nothing, regardless if it's good or bad, and only allow what's supposed to happen, everybody's going to get blown up, right? It's not, it's once again, company ending.
Yeah. Well, we did a webinar on that a few weeks or was it last month or a month? Anyway, out on
Hit up YouTube. It's there.
It's hit YouTube or our on-demand webinars page on succurri.com. It's there. We go into more detail about zero trust in case you're curious. So Andrew, as you look at these, why 3 to 6 months? Why did these make it on the list for that time frame, and how should company leaders be looking at this?
Yeah, so to give some perspective, the first slide, which was to take care of immediately, those are things that are easy to fix and have a very high risk profile. So you should just stop what you're doing and get them done. This 3 to 6 months list, these are tougher to do, right? You have to spend some time going through and figuring out what your goals are, like what is allowed, what is not allowed. Zero trust takes some time to implement. Evaluating your third-party providers takes time, but you've got to do those things, right? And so it takes time to do them. They have to be done, but it does take a little bit of time.
Got it. Okay. Well, let's move on to a little bit longer term, but still mistakes. The last 4 big IT mistakes that businesses make. And we've had some conversation about these things. There's 2 items in red. So walk me through some of these, Grant.
Yeah. So going back to I was talking about a little bit about a disaster recovery, but in this one, we're talking about like an incident response. And so incident response covers disaster, like it's the kind of the overarching. And so what happens when something goes
Sorry
sideways?
to interrupt, but just so everybody knows, incident response is if something catastrophic does happen or serious does happen, how fast, how well do you respond to that incident?
Exactly. And so, incident response is when something horrible has happened, right? And that could be a cyber event, that could be a disaster recovery in terms of like theft, fire, natural disaster. It is the planning for the worst case scenario. And I will tell you from personal experience, probably 75 to 80% of companies in the SMB space, if not higher, don't have an incident response plan. And if they do, see, Andrew's even higher. And the ones that do have it, I would say, are either they haven't really gone through the terms on it, right? They haven't actually tested it out to see if it works. They might have a paper document that's a couple paragraphs long, and that like, we're going to meet at so-and-so's house and we're going to bring our laptops. I'm not going to knock, because that is a start, right? It's better than nothing, but that is certainly not going to get you through all the details of an actual incident. And not to mention, that would be, if it was a cyber incident where you got ransomware, meeting with encrypted laptops is probably not going to help you much. Right. So I highly suggest sitting down for a tabletop exercise with your IT provider, with your management team, your ownership team, and all the stakeholders for every department at least once a year, and just do maybe an offsite if you can. If you can't, maybe do it over a couple long lunches, and just sit through and work through, if something happens, how do we respond, right? And so we're big fans of start somewhere. You gotta crawl before you walk. So at least sit down and start having a conversation. Honestly, AI nowadays, they can bust you out a plan pretty well. I'm not saying then call it good. I'm saying use that as a guideline to start having that exercise.
Perfection or progress, not perfection.
Correct.
Yeah. And the training aspect of that maybe, well, when I saw training, I was thinking like cybersecurity training, or the one I need is phishing.
Yeah.
Training on stop clicking stuff.
So I would say that's almost a category all in itself, right?
Yeah.
That's another thing that I get very common conversation for business owners of like, is that really necessary? Does that really help? I feel like it's wasting my staff's time. And the answer to the question is yes, it is absolutely necessary. Now, there's a significant curve of return on investment right out of the gate. right? So when you first implement a solid training, you're going to see a significant drop in a short amount of time from your staff not clicking on things that they shouldn't, right? So you're going to start with the pretty significant bell curve where you're going to start to see how many people in your staff could potentially cause a company ending event. And then through a little bit of training in a short amount of time, say, a month or two, you're going to see, you're going to reap the benefits of that training, because people are going to stop clicking on things, or not everyone, but most of them are going to stop clicking on things. And then you can focus on the employees that will click on anything you put in front of them, and then really decide where that risk factor comes into play. But that is one of the easiest things to do, and one of the hardest things for us to stop. I can't stop an employee from clicking on something, right?
Yeah.
We're using a technical control. If a bad actor sends a phishing email to one of your employees and they don't know how to understand what they're looking at, and they click on that, I can't stop them from giving up their password. I can't stop them from, authorizing a MFA. Only training can stop those things. And so, yes, the answer is training is very, very important. So anybody that says it's not, they need to have how about this? I want to have a lunch with you.
Yeah. Well, these next two seem like they should be together, or they're tied together. No IT budget in place, no IT strategy tied to those business goals. How do most, well, and I'll ask this question again, do these mistakes happen at every level? Do they happen at certain levels of businesses, like size of businesses? Or because, if you're what I would call a micro business, you're less than 5 people. That's different than if you're 50 people. You might still need a budget and a strategy and have business goals, but the scale of those things could be different, maybe. How do you guys look at it?
Yeah, I can answer that. So this slide, so like the previous slides had certain size company, like you can't evolve past a certain size company from an IT standpoint. The first slide was shared accounts, passwords, MFA, backups, like bad configuration settings. You don't scale past a certain size business. So that's generally like 5 to 30 employees exist in that state. Now, it can happen to bigger companies, but most don't survive past, a couple of events. The second slide was like those longer term IT tactical items. We see that from like those issues happen from 30 to like 80 employees, right? You've now gotten to this more like confident level in what you're doing, and you want more from your technology. This level, you don't grow past these mistakes. After you get to about 150 people, like you just don't. Now, the awesome thing though is a micro business at 5 people can take advantage of all of these strategic things. And so, we talk, if you don't have a budget in place, if you don't have IT strategy, I want, like we were talking yesterday, and we'll have a little story time, because I think this helps bring together why IT strategy is so important. So at Succurri, our fundamental belief is that technology trails behind business strategy or business goals, right? Like you shouldn't even talk technology until you know the business goal. And so we're going to talk about the tale of two businesses. We have one business that's, let's say, 50 employees. We have one business that's 15 employees. And the first business that's 50 employees has a really clear vision of what their business goals are. They know where they're going. They know what they want to make. They know what they want to have outcomes for. They also understand that IT strategy is one of the pillars that gets them there. And that if they ignore IT strategy, it costs them a lot of time and process. So company one with 50 employees is very IT strategy centric, because the strategy helps them fulfill their business goals. Company number 2 at 15 employees doesn't really have a ton of business strategy. They're very reactive. They take the business that comes to them, and they're just kind of moving along, like the leaf blowing in the wind. They don't see the value of IT strategy. They only understand the cost, right? And so the differentiator here that I want to show, and we figured this out like last year when we implemented a new line of business that highlighted this, is company one with 50 employees and is a big reliance on IT strategy, had us design their network, and we designed it in a way that was very efficient, gave them everything they needed. They invested, right? It wasn't free, but it was very elegantly designed. So it had very few network devices. They were all sized correctly. It was just very well designed. Company number two doesn't want to spend the initial investment in that IT strategy and that equipment. And so they've been buying less expensive devices, and they have to buy more of them because they have to put them around the company. They don't want to buy the cabling. And so they have this much larger amount of equipment than company number one. And so one of our services is that we cover network equipment. And so company one, which has 50 employees, has very few actually network devices because they're very elegantly designed. And they spend about $150 a month in that IT support cost. Company number two, with 15 employees, has probably 20 network devices because they don't want to be, if they don't want to invest, or they don't see the value in investing in efficiency and IT strategy. And they're paying about $350 a month in that network management. So if you look at it from this standpoint, company one is 3 times larger than company two and is spending half of what company two is spending. So when we talk about the cost of IT, there's the cost of what you spend, and then there's the cost of what you don't get as in outcomes. And so company number two is effectively taking a 6 times loss, right? They are encumbered with 6 times more costs than they should be compared to company number one. And that all happened because of IT strategy. So like, how many times a day are we making those decisions? How many companies are making those decisions that encumber them with more expense, more cost, and it takes them longer to move forward? It's with good IT strategy that's driven by good business goals, you can move forward knowing the true cost of IT, and you pay for it in your budgets, and versus not knowing the true cost of IT, which is those outcomes, right? So IT budget is critical. IT strategy is critical. Any company of any size can take advantage of them. The ones that really survive and grow understand that factor.
Well, what's interesting to me too is you really just have to have the conversation with folks like you who approach it this way. It doesn't mean you get the information to make the decision. Like, where are there opportunities like that, network devices, look, you've got 20 network devices, you need 2, or, we could go down the list of what a network device is, but it's like, have the conversation really is all I'm hearing. Just because having the conversations doesn't cost you anything necessarily, but what you don't decide on could.
Yeah.
And it's the common misconception of the penny wise, dollar foolish.
Yeah.
Right. And so, hey, I'm so concerned about fixated on costs that I'm going to go the cheapest route possible on this network device versus having a proper infrastructure that might cost a little bit more today, but in the grand scheme of things is significantly cheaper over time. Right.
Yeah.
So you're thinking about the problem of today versus fixing the problems of tomorrow.
Yeah. And to give you an example of that, so the saying I love is this: the tuition at the School of Hard Knocks is the most expensive school you will ever pay for. And so every problem that you solve that has already been solved by somebody else, that puts you 2 steps behind. And experts like Grant and I, and we do this in our own business, we look for those experts who can help us shortcut. I don't want to walk on paths that are full of glass and wind into dead ends. I want to know how to get to the end, how to get to my goal, and I want to spend all my energy on that. I don't want to learn every wrong avenue to go down. I spent a lot of time and money on those wrong avenues, and I paid a lot of tuition at the School of Hard Knocks. And now I'm paying for people to help me navigate those hard roads because we, Succurri, are determined to be wildly successful. And so what I would tell any business owner or decision maker listening to this is the cost of talking to high quality IT strategists like Grant and myself is insignificant compared to the value that we should be able to provide you in outcomes. And like what I talked earlier, the cost of anything is the monetary number and the unrealized outcome that you may or may not achieve. And so cost is usually 25% or less. The outcome is usually 75% of where you get value. So you talk to someone like me, I can tell you how to navigate your IT journey very efficiently and save money over time. And if you do that with every decision time and time again, all of a sudden things start to get easier and then cheaper over time. But if you're just, the only strategic measure you have is like the cost you can see, you're only focusing on 25% of the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So this last one, treating compliance as a binder, not an operating system. This one kind of, I think compliance is something that, well, not every business leadership team looks at like, oh, we've got to be compliant. Maybe in healthcare, or maybe if you're, running government contracts as the prime vendor, or or you're working for one of those vendors, you get exposed to compliance. But why is this one of those listed under strategic advantage, the mistake that people make?
Well, I think, Tony, you point out a misconception that a lot of people have that is starting to come to light pretty quickly, is that people think about, oh, I don't deal with medical records, so I don't need, HIPAA, or I don't do credit cards, so it's not PCI. But just about every company that we work with is having us fill out an insurance form. And the insurance form, whether you know it or not, is a compliance noose around your neck. And so if you're not, so that is the hidden compliance, right? You have attested to controls to get that policy. And so if you are saying that you are doing these things and you're actually not, one, that policy is null and void, right? So all that money that you spent on a cybersecurity insurance policy isn't going to pay out. Your company's done, and so just close the doors, walk out. But there's probably also some level of legal recourse, based on some of the answers that you're filling out there. You might even be using that document for getting contracts and things. So keep in mind that that's where, a lot of people don't have the light bulb turn on about compliance, but chances are you have to be compliant with something one way, shape, or form. And so the reason why we put this here is that I've heard it too often that I don't have any compliance or environments, and you probably do. And when they do start thinking about like the insurance form, for example, they treat it like check boxes, right? Do I have these things? Do I not have them? They don't really, rather than layering it on top of IT strategy and like cybersecurity policies or cybersecurity strategy, it's just like, check the box, right? Do we have it? Great, whatever, moving on, versus actually using these types of things, like these compliance check boxes, using them as a strategic goal, right? So we have a lot of conversations with manufacturing companies that are doing most of the things that they need to do to be like CMMC compliant, but they have no documentation for it, right? And now they're treating one siloed potential compliance avenue and not actually leveraging it as a strategic value for being able to get more contracts. And they have no tool to be able to document it. And so rather than just kind of treating it as like the check boxes that I check off to get my insurance, having a actual tool that you can leverage different frameworks and actually look for business and contracts in other arenas.
So, yeah, and to add to that too, so Grant's talking about the consequences and missing opportunities, and I think those are extremely important. The other side of this coin, though, is compliance is a risk mitigation tool. So most compliance frameworks, which are like the spreadsheet of all these different questions they ask, are really just a best practice. Like I truthfully haven't read one yet that is onerous, that's inappropriate for the level of what it's protecting. And so although everyone gives compliance a really bad name and, oh, icky, that's a lot of time and wasted money, it's really not, especially if you think of it as a risk mitigation tool. So if I can pretty much tell you that if you haven't gone through the exercise of creating a compliance process or going through a compliance process and creating your binder, you just don't know where your risks are at. And if you can reduce like if you can spend money, a low amount of money in a non-emergency environment at your time frame, you've taken all the risk out of that event happening, because when it does happen, you'll be prepared and you'll have controls in place to protect you, versus if you hope that you're okay, when the event happens, you're now having to spend money at not your time frame. You don't know the cost and you don't know the impact. And so what I think of compliance as every business owner's like risk mitigation tool. We always talk about trust and verify, right? Like trust that your IT is doing compliance, or trust that your staff is doing it, but verify it with the compliance framework that you go through. And there's lots of really simple ones. I think actually CMMC1, no matter what industry you're in, is a good one for you to do. If you get it and you can do government contracts, even better. But as a business owner, you just don't know what you don't know, and hoping that somebody in your office is going to take as much time to care about your business as you do it just doesn't happen. So once again, spend $5,000, do a compliance audit. It is the best money you'll spend that year, and you will know where your problems are at, and you will gain control back of that piece of your business.
I'll even one up you on that, Andrew. So NIST, CMMC comes from NIST, and NIST has a cybersecurity framework. And anybody that hasn't gone down, like hasn't even started the path of compliance or knowing where you sit from your risk profile, if you reach out to me, I will give you NIST CSF for free, and that goes on even for YouTube. So I will give you a portal with NIST CSF for free.
Okay, so if anybody has watched to this level, in fact, this part might even be, a lot of times we'll take these big webinar videos and we'll chop them up and make real specific videos. But if anybody's watching this, follow the QR code at the end, and that'll get you to Grant's schedule, and you can talk to him about that. That's a huge thing. What I've learned over the last 2 years in working with you guys, that is a big deal.
It's a huge deal because it gives you the understanding of what you're missing, and you can start developing where your risks are at. Like I'm not going to make you compliant, right? I'm going to give you the tool for free that you can go in there and fill out your information, and you can start working on that process on your own. And obviously we're here to help with questions and things like that. But that tends to be the hurdle of getting somebody to start, is that, I don't have the time, I don't have the money. Well, I've just removed the money barrier to getting into that portal.
Oh, wow. That's great. That is great. So we're closing in here, and I want to talk a little bit about the approach to aligning IT strategy with business goals. And this little graph can kind of make your eyes, blur a little bit. But what you'll notice is that business strategy drives everything pretty much. Business policies and procedure, IT strategy. When you talk about business strategy, we can come back to this slide. But one of the things that everybody wants to be involved or wants to be is they want to have a competitive advantage. And so a couple of things that we talked about in terms of solving the mistakes, we got into lowering costs, or I'm actually going to talk about cost leadership. When you think about what a business is trying to do, they're growing sales. They've got people that deliver whether it's products or services. They got financial staff or bookkeeper. They've got IT in some way, or should have IT in some way. How do you guys look at strategic advantage and competitive advantage in terms of the cost leadership that you might provide as a part of that?
Yeah, I can jump in on that one. So, we'll go back to that story I was telling earlier about the story at the tale of the two companies. And so the bigger company, which had an IT strategy, which was driven by their business goals, was spending less every month than the company that was half their size, which was spending double or was 3 times their size, a third of their size. And so, from a cost leadership standpoint, every dollar that a company spends has to return more than $1 worth of value back. And for the little company, they were every dollar they spent, they were getting 30 cents of value back. Where the big company, every dollar they were spending, they were getting, potentially $2 or $3 worth of value, right? So when you look at it from that standpoint, like we talked about, there's the cost, which is the cost of IT, or the cost of anything, is the dollar of value, and then the value of the outcomes that are generated. And if you're spending your dollars in a way that gives you low value back, you're never going to get a competitive advantage. And that's the thing. So the bigger company took all those extra dollars they weren't spending because they were efficient, and they put it towards something more valuable, like more team members to get more sales, more tools to give them more efficiency, charge their customers less to get higher customer value outcomes. Whereas the little company is always scrapping and never goes any further than where they're at, because they don't understand that competitive advantage isn't about spending less. And IT strategy isn't about spending less. It's about getting a high value outcome from the dollars you spend.
Andrew, at one point in time, we had a conversation about how there are different commodities like tools and dollars and energy, and how resources, basically everybody's competing with the same resources or different resources. Remind me of that story, and because when you told it to me, I was like, oh, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So we talk about cost once again, right? It's the real value of any cost are the outcomes. And so the dollars are just a way to kind of quantify, the part of the cost. The outcomes are what matters. So if you look at like a graph of like maturity, if you look at like resources, right? So the first one is when we start at the bottom, we're like, oh, dollars relate to value and they relate to power. And that's true to a certain extent. But when you get to a certain size of a business or a certain like level in your life, you realize, well, it's actually time, right? Like I've got a bunch of money now, but I don't have more than 24 hours in the day. So every hour that I'm spending time doing something that I shouldn't be, or that's a low value task, I can't make more of those dollars, or I can't do more of whatever it is I'm trying to do. And then when you mature past that level, when you realize like every day still has 24 hours, but every day does not have 24 hours worth of energy. And so when I talk about energy, I'm talking about like your ability to accomplish things. And so in an average day, we might have 2 to 4 hours of like what I'll call creative energy. And then we probably have 2 to 4 hours of get it done energy. And so that's only 8 hours in a 24-hour day. So we realize really quickly is if we are giving away our energy because our emotional state, our mental state is being sucked dry by low value activities that we didn't spend the right type of money on, you might burn a whole day, right? Like what could you do in a day if you had all that energy that day to do something creative with your day, to move your business forward? Like, and I'm talking, I don't want to be too vague here, but ultimately, if I was to spend those 4 hours every day during my creative energy hours, I would move my company into being, the company of my dreams. If I spent all 8 of those hours doing low value tasks like fighting for, things that I could have paid to have fixed earlier, the company just stagnates and probably shrinks. So, yeah.
I was going to say the story you're talking about is, in one person, but what we're talking about is a business here. So if your team is sucked into solving problems that could be solved by investing in a relationship with a great managed service provider that handles that, we'll go back to the 50-person company versus the 15-person company, where the 15-person company had 3 times as many network devices and paid more per month. Well, not only are they paying more for that because it's not optimized and low quality, their team's energy is getting sucked into solving problems versus investing in an optimized system that doesn't suck that time and energy away from the team. So when you look at cost leadership, it's a dollars and cents thing, but it's also what are people spending their time and energy on, and what should they be spending their time and energy on?
Yeah. I mean, if you and the team and like extrapolating that to your company is so critical, right? And so like the question as a business leader should be, what would my company be able to do today if every one of my creative team members could spend their like maximum energy on creating new things? Or what would my company look like today if my team was always energized to take excellent care of my customers and only focus on high value outcomes? Oftentimes we just throw our staff at low value outcomes or low value tasks, and they get burned out. They don't provide good customer service. They're not creative. They're like, well, that's not my job, right? Like you have this really like deflating like employee and staff culture, versus if people have lots of energy, they're inflating your business and growing your business. So energy is just such an important concept to be aware of, and it's so finite, right? We only have maybe 4 to 8 hours a day to actually do stuff with.
So we're a little over on time, but I do want to give us a chance to talk about differentiation in the same way. Leadership in a lower cost, or leadership in being more competitive, having a competitive advantage, leveraging IT to do that. I also know there's a giveaway that we've got to get to. So I'm sorry for cutting us short on time here a little bit, but maybe talk about differentiation and we can take questions.
Yeah, Grant, maybe you can talk about, tools, people, and process execution.
Yeah. So it's really common when I'm talking to a prospect that I'm told that what they do is different than everybody else, different than all their competitors. And so I often have to ask that question of like, okay, well, what makes you different? Most of the time it's that they're very special because their staff and their tools give them this competitive advantage. And unfortunately, I'm going to break that mold or that understanding today. And I have to hold back during the conversation process because I don't want to sound, mean or arrogant or anything like that. But the reality is that every person that I work with in those industries uses probably pretty close to the same tool set. They are all pulling from the same potential workforce. And the only differentiation that company has compared to their competitors is their process and their execution. That's it. And we are no different from our company is no different as well. We came to that conclusion as well, is that, years ago, our tool set was, top of the line and maybe nobody else had it around us. And so that was maybe a competitive advantage at the time. And then maybe it was like we're in Seattle. And so we've got, a heavy level of tech here in this market. And we're able to pull from some heavily talented, employees. That's all changed, right? That is not a competitive advantage for us anymore. What makes us different and what makes other companies different is really the delivery of the delivery of their process and the execution of that and how well they execute on that process. And so when I say process, I'm talking about lots of different processes, obviously, right?
Yeah.
But that is what makes a company different in today's competitive landscape.
And simply put, if they're sucked into dealing with IT issues that they don't have to deal with, because they're eliminated or because they're handled in a more expedient way. And by eliminate, I mean they don't put themselves in the situation to have those issues. Then they can spend time focused on execution rather than dealing with problems.
Well, and I think it really goes back to
way to look at it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you look at like the 15-person company versus the 50-person company, right? So the 50-person company is the one that's actually sitting down and documenting their process, right? They have a repeatable process. They have a very specific execution and an expectation of what that execution of that process looks like, right? And so you're going to have a 98% delivery on expectation versus the 15-person company that's kind of running around and like Andrew put is like, it's like the leaf in the wind. That process may differ from employee because there is no process, no documented process. Somebody does it kind of a little bit different. Sometimes you get the case of telephone where, well, so-and-so told me how to do it this way. And so coming from a business owner, you're like, hey, I used to do it this way, and now it's being done completely different. What went wrong, right? And so it just continues that on the small company, it continues to spiral out of control because you don't have anything that's actually documented. You don't have your SOPs, you don't have your knowledge base, and you don't have any way to enforce it versus that 50-person company is like, this is how we do it. This is how we expect it to come out. And if it doesn't come out this way, we're going to know where the problem came from. And that's what's making those companies continue to grow and the 15-person companies stay where they're at.
Well, hey, we've kind of run out of time. I don't know if there are any questions to answer, but this last statement to me kind of says it all. Andrew, walk through this.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you think about this, we'll use the tale of those two companies again, right? So every mistake or every time that smaller company chooses that, spending dollars is the primary strategy they have, they fall behind more and more because they have more cost and they have lower value outcomes. And so every time they do that, they fall 2 steps behind the other company, which is streamlined and efficient and has a clear target. So the other company, the bigger company, moves faster. They're further steps ahead. And every time the little company makes that mistake, the distance keeps growing. And it grows to the point that sometimes where you'll never catch up to the bigger company. And so, so what we say, basically is for every mistake you make, it puts you 2 steps behind your competitors. And so what would it be like if you don't have to make those mistakes in IT, right? If you knew what the cost would be to get good information, to get the path to go where you need to go, to be able to have a team that can execute for you, where would you be if your IT was not an expense or a frustration or a problem, but was truly a competitive advantage, helping push you forward, right? Like we can be part of that wind in your sails, pushing your business forward faster and more efficiently than your competitors. And so that's what we do for our customers is we help them avoid those mistakes. We help them get every dollar spent to have a lot of high value outcomes, and we get them ahead of their competitors so that they can really shine and capture more work.
That is powerful stuff. I think up until now, maybe I've thought about it a little bit, but the picture is so clear to me that when, as a business owner, you're making decisions all the time on things, and your leadership team is making decisions. And when you make wrong decisions, you make mistakes, that's you're slowing the team down in the race against competition. So avoid making those with the right players on the team with the right knowledge, and specifically in IT is a part of that, should be a part of that team.
Yeah, I mean, if you think of the visual as you're running a relay race, if one of the people in the relay race trips and gets up and then they get the baton and they move to the next person, the other team's already like a quarter of the way down the field, right? Very hard to make up that gap. And if you do it very frequently, you're going to be the loser every single time.
Yeah. Oh, good stuff.
Yeah, and I think from a Q&A standpoint, I think we probably just let them know they can reach out to us. So maybe you show the contact information.
Yeah. Oops. One last thing. So this QR code takes you to Grant's calendar if you want to have a conversation about your business goals, whether you think you want to hire Succurri or not. Have a conversation about those goals so you can explore opportunity and look at that and have somebody walk you through that, to where maybe you do, there are opportunities to save, or there are opportunities to invest. You can keep from stepping in an IT pothole that puts you behind the competition and keeps you from executing. It's a great way to do this. No obligation. I can attest. Obviously, Grant's a great guy. He puts it in simple terms, and he shoots straight. So have that strategy session with him.
Well, the ask on that is, if you define your IT as fine, I challenge you to understand what IT looks like when it's great.
Perfect. And go subscribe to our YouTube channel, like it, check all the other things out. We mentioned a few things in this video, that there's way more detail on compliance and security and training and all the important things we've talked about in this video. There's a lot of other great information out there on YouTube or on our on-demand page on the website, succurri.com. Thank you guys again. This was great stuff.
Yep.
Sorry we went a little long, but I think was important.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Take care.
All right, we'll see you.
Bye-bye.